New Zealand is one of the world's greatest adventure frontiers, earning its reputation because of pristine landscapes and abundant wildlife. The remote region of the far north is well known for marine life of epic proportions and is every fishing adventurer's dream destination. Those lucky enough to live in this part of the country enjoy some of the best saltwater environments on offer. Kerry Flowers is one of the few local residents aspiring to chase the adventure. His passion for the ocean started at an early age. He regularly freedives around the coastlines in search of crayfish, much like his father, who dived commercially for them most of his life. You get the feeling that this has inspired Kerry down a path that has led to an obsession for the ocean. Since discovering the kayak, Kerry has pushed the limits in search of that bigger fish.
So I first started fishing when I was 5 really, I suppose, at the back of my parents' farm. There was a little creek running through there, and I would spend hours and hours turning rocks over and catching the little freshwater crayfish in there. Okay, so some of my past history of the ocean includes fishing with my father when I was a teenager. We used to go out in his aluminium tinny and catch a lot of snapper out off Tokerau Beach in the Doubtless Bay area. Then as an adult I by chance bought a fishing kayak, simply because my mate had one and he was urging me to come out with him. From that point on I got 100% addicted, and I couldn't leave it alone. I had to go out every weekend. After a few years of catching snapper and achieving some fantastic snapper, I started to look for bigger fish. Around this time I started to get into mechanical jigging for kingfish. I really wanted to catch kingfish, and I wasn't getting that many by trolling liveys, so I got into mechanical jigging and I really got into catching a lot of kingfish. It was while catching yellowtail kingfish that I first got onto catching big fish. I was getting a lot of shark attack, and that really got me fired up. I really enjoyed fighting a big, hard fighting bronze whaler shark, and that got me starting to think about targeting the holy grail of game fish, the marlin. So why a marlin? Well, they're an exceptionally hard fighting fish. They're not easy to come by. They're sought after by almost every fisherman who's out there, and they're a real challenge. Okay, one thing that really attracted me about catching a marlin from a kayak is that it hadn't been done before in New Zealand. There'd been cases of guys hooking up accidentally while catching tuna, including a case of a guy in Taranaki, which is on the west coast in the middle of the North Island, where he hooked up to a marlin and the result was one completely melted down reel. One of the reasons I believe that a marlin hadn't been caught in New Zealand from a kayak was due to the sheer size of the marlin we get down here. Generally, our striped marlin here are the largest in the world, and this made me somewhat apprehensive, realising I was going to go out and target a very big fish. There was a very real chance that I would be on this fish for hours and be towed in upwards of 10 kilometres during the fight. So when I made the decision to go out and target a marlin, I needed to prepare for that in several ways. The first thing I needed to do was I needed to make sure that my gear was up to scratch. So I read a lot of articles by Rob Fort and Stephen Tapp in various magazines, and I talked to a lot of people, Kieran from Reel Rods and several other people I knew who'd caught a lot of marlin. Through talking to those people, I started to develop a plan, but because most of the knowledge that they'd been trying to impart on me was to do with catching marlin from a boat, I needed to think a little bit differently. I knew from my experience catching big sharks that once the fish started to run, the kayak would follow. I didn't need a big reel with a huge line capacity. My smaller jigging reel was going to be fine because the kayak would simply follow behind the fish. All I needed was a really good drag and a really smooth reel. Once I'd decided to go and catch my marlin, I needed to decide how I was going to do it. Most marlin in New Zealand are targeted with game lures. However, from what I read about them, they needed to be towed fast, far faster than what I could tow from my kayak. So I needed to go the other way, and that was live bait. Preferably the live bait was to be a tuna, but a kahawai would have done fine as well. So now I had a plan of what I was going to do, but I needed to work out where I was likely to find the marlin. There were several things I needed. I needed the marlin to be close to shore. I couldn't paddle out for 15 k's and then fight a marlin and have it tow me another 10 kilometres and then manage to get back. The reserves were going to be somewhat lacking. So I identified a few areas where the blue water came very close to the shore. The west coast out from Mahipara and Cape Kerry were the ideal chances. The first couple of attempts I had were out on the west coast. They were long days paddling. Both days I struggled to get a live bait, and once I did, things were pretty quiet. I wasn't seeing a lot of fish action, and the water temperature was still fairly cold, and the water didn't really have that real nice blue look to it that is associated with our marlin in this country. Once I got out there and started catching tuna, I needed to rig them up to catch my marlin. The first few I bridle rigged, and I lost the lot of them. At the time I thought it was just sharks coming along and ripping them off, but now I'm not so sure. It could well have been a bill strike from a marlin and that my rigging string was simply not strong enough. So the day I caught my marlin, the conditions didn't look very good. At home watching the forecast, I'd already decided I wasn't going to go out and try and catch a marlin. It was 15 knots offshore forecast, so I just thought I was going to go to Matai Bay, head out, jig on a few kingfish, have a little bit of fun. I went here to try and seek some shelter from the forecast wind. I got to Matai Bay early and I headed straight out and started jigging on the kingfish grounds. The kingfish had other plans, however, and didn't want to play ball. While I was out there, I happened to notice what a great day it was. There was no wind and the water was perfect. The forecast was well off. I decided I'd just head out to the blue water and have a little bit of a look. So I rigged a lure and a little tuna lure to try and catch a skipjack tuna, and I headed out. It wasn't long before the tuna lure got hit and I put the tuna on as a live bait. Because I'd lost a few tuna before by bridle rigging them, I decided this time I wasn't going to bridle rig it. I really felt I wasn't going to catch a marlin today. I just felt I was going out there for a look. So I just put the hook through the upper jaw of the tuna and set it out swimming behind me as I paddled on. I carried on heading out to sea, and during the time picked up a couple more tuna. They went in the kayak for a feed. By now I was about 10 kilometres out from Matai Bay, and I was at the point where I was thinking about turning around. I didn't know what the forecast was going to do, what the wind was going to do, as it had been forecasted to be a lot worse. The bait fish didn't really do anything at all. I mean, I was just paddling along, and the clicker on the reel just gave a bit of a squawk. I stopped, picked the reel up. It was slack line, so I just wound the slack out of the line, and that's when the weight came on. So now I'm hooked up, but I've got no idea what I've got, you know. So the first thing I need to do is I need to get a knife out. My knife was sitting in my kayak, so I opened the hatch and I got the knife and I put it there. If this turned out to be a shark, I was going to cut that line real quick. Then I needed my camera rolling, obviously. I didn't know what this was, but I wanted to get it on film. There was a lot of weight there, you know. The kayak was being towed at this stage as well. I was doing about 5 kilometres an hour, as I was for most of the fight. So I finally got my camera up on my head. Then I was ready to start fighting the fish. The fish was still really high in the water column at this stage. It hadn't dived deep or anything. It hadn't done much at all, but I'd put no pressure on it. So finally I was ready to put some pressure on it, so I slid my drag lever up and I leaned into the rod. I gave a couple of winds and I leaned in again. And I started to get a little bit of line back, and then it went nuts. The line just peeled off and it came up to the surface. At this stage I knew I was going to find out pretty soon what it was. And I saw a little splash up in the distance. I still couldn't see what it was though, and I was still thinking shark. Then it did another big run, and all of a sudden it leapt out of the water.
Yeah.
Holy, it's a marlin. I was just, oh man, I was amazed. I was screaming like a little girl. I was just ecstatic. I couldn't believe it, to be honest. I really couldn't believe it. It took, I don't know how long for the realisation to set in that I'd actually hooked what I'd been out there to catch. The marlin leapt a couple of times, or quite a few times actually, and then it went deep. It headed down, and I was in approximately 120 metres by this stage of water, and it went down to between 50 and 70 metres, and it stayed there. The whole time it was towing me at about 5 kilometres per hour. Now it was towing me at 5 kilometres per hour and sitting down at 70 metres. The real grunt work started to begin then, and it was just a case of leaning into the rod and lifting and winding and lifting and winding, and when my arms got too sore, it was putting the rod on my leg and lifting my leg and getting a wind, and lifting my leg and getting another wind. This carried on for probably 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes. Then I started to get a bit of line back. And I knew it was swimming up. I wasn't getting a little bit of line, I was getting a lot of line. All of a sudden, I had all my line back. And the fish was swimming just in front of me. Then it came alongside and it went under the kayak, and next minute it leapt out of the water right next to the kayak on my left hand side. It splashed a couple of times, then it did a few more leaps, pulling a bit more string, and then it threw its front fin up, turned circle, and came in a big circle around to the right hand side of the kayak. By this stage I had the leader on the reel and the fish was right next to the kayak. Technically a caught fish. It was swimming alongside the kayak, and I had, like I say, I had the leader on the reel. It was still towing me, but it's swimming right next to me. At this point I reached out and I grabbed its tail. I was trying to grab this fish. Really I wanted to get this fish up on my lap and have a photo with it in my lap. I thought by this stage the fish was pretty tired. I was later proved very, very wrong. So I was able to reach out and touch the tail a couple of times. I couldn't quite get a grab on it, but it was swimming that close to me that I was easily able to touch the tail. And had I had a flying gaff or a tagpole, it would have been no problem to get into the fish at this stage. With the marlin alongside, it was a really special experience. The marlin was all lit up. It had big bright blue stripes along its side, you know, and being able to touch it, being able to reach out and touch its tail was really quite special, you know. It was a really neat experience, and this was a big fish. I wasn't particularly worried about it leaping out of the water and landing on the kayak or spearing me through with its bill or anything. In fact, I thought the marlin was pretty knackered. I mean, I know I was feeling that I'd had a pretty good fight. I knew I hadn't been on it for a long time, and I knew it hadn't towed me very far because I'd put a mark on my GPS. But I still, for some reason, thought that I'd beaten this fish, and that was harking back to my experience with sharks that do tire very quickly and very easily. And then all of a sudden it woke up again, proving that I was definitely wrong about it being exhausted. It went nuts right next to the kayak and leapt straight out of the water. Again and again and again as it took off, looping around to my left. It stayed quiet a little bit, and I thought all of a sudden I was going to get the line back again. But by this stage, it had got me side on. The kayak was side on, and the fish took off. Because I was side on, I couldn't follow the fish, and it pulled a hell of a lot of string. And it leapt, and it leapt, and it leapt, and it leapt. Probably pulled over 100 metres of string in that particular run. And I finally got the kayak slewed around to follow it, and at that stage it went deep again. At this point it just became a real slog. It was sitting between 50 and 80 metres a lot of the time, and I'd get a little line and it'd take a little line, but it was only a few metres at a time. All the time I was still being towed around the 4 to 5 kilometre per hour mark. This went on and on and on. The muscles got tired, the arms got sore, the leg got sore from lifting it up on the rod when the arms got too sore. It was a real slog, and it was a slog for quite some time. I estimate at least 3/4 of an hour. So the whole time I was fighting the fish, I had this little niggling thought in my mind. The fish was the whole time towing me offshore. It was headed straight towards a big patch of reef called the Garden Patch, which is approximately 20 kilometres offshore. The whole time I was starting to get a little bit concerned. The wind was building. It wasn't that bad, but it was building. And this fish was just not tiring. There were times when I was thinking I was going to have to cut it off. But I was monitoring my GPS, and I knew I was still only 15 kilometres out from the beach. So I'd been out on this fish for a long time. I was sore and everything, but I started to get some line back. I really felt I'd won this time, and I really started to get some line back. It'd pull a little bit, but every time I get a few winds, I'd get a few more than what it was pulling. I got it up over 50 metres. I got it up over 40 metres. And finally, in the 30-metre mark, when I was really heaving on it, the hook pulled. I was gutted. I'd really wanted a photo of that fish sitting in my lap. However, I was absolutely elated. I was pretty tired and knackered, but I was elated. I'd gone out there and I'd done it, but I wasn't sure. I knew I'd touched the leader and I knew I'd touched the fish, but I wasn't sure what counted. I wasn't sure if that was really going to count for a capture or not. So while I was elated, I still had a niggling doubt in my mind that I'd actually done, or that I knew I'd done it, but whether I'd be recognised for doing it or not. I was pretty tired and I was pretty hungry at this stage. Luckily I had a good supply of food on board, so I had a bit of a feed and calmed myself down a bit. All the while the wind was starting to build. The 15 knots that they'd forecast had arrived, and it was probably more like 18 knots. Here, from that point on, things got tough. Things got tough mentally and physically. I was, by this stage, 13 kilometres offshore, and I had 15 to 18 knots blowing against me. All I really could do was just gut in and paddle and paddle and paddle. Most of the time I was only doing about 3 kilometres an hour, and I estimate it took me 5 hours to get back to the beach without stopping. It was one of the most grueling paddles I've ever done, to be honest. And when I got back to the beach and looked at the time, it was 6 o'clock. So in the aftermath of doing it, I was walking around on a pretty high cloud for a couple of days, and then reality came crashing down, and I was back to work and everything. And I started to see some of the people I'd been talking to about it. They confirmed what I'd been hoping for, that if I'd touched the leader, that it would be confirmed as a catch. And also the people I showed the photo to remarked about the size of the marlin. The first guy I showed actually said to me, "Oh wow, you got a really big one." Subsequently I've showed it to quite a few people, and they're estimating the size around 120 kilos, which is only probably average for the marlin that we get here in New Zealand. Next year, when the blue water comes in again, I'll be out paddling it there trying to catch another marlin. That was the first official captured marlin from a kayak in New Zealand.